Hi, my name is Ben Golden. I am the Director of Product Management at Stream, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about build versus buy decisions and why I think it's usually buy. So before I get into the rest of my content, I will just give a full disclosure that I build cloud components for a living. I work at a company called Stream and previously worked at SendGrid as well as Twilio. And so, I've made a career out of building these things that I'm saying people should buy instead of build themselves. So I may be a little biased, but I think, as we talk through this, there is like a very reasonable, rational case to be made for why buying is often the right choice. So hopefully I'll kind of paint that picture as we talk through, but full disclosure, I may be a little biased. All right, so my presentation today, I'll kind of walk through three things. So first, just a simple framework that I use for thinking about how to make these build versus buy decisions, kind of what kinds of things to be thinking about and doing as you go through that process. And then second, I really want to focus on opportunity costs. I think at the core of like any successful business really is this fundamental understanding that you're building something that your customers value, and that their valuing of what it is that you're doing catches on like wildfire. More and more people take hold of using your product because it's something unique, it's something novel that actually provides them some value they can't get elsewhere. And I think that really kind of goes back to, as you're building that project, as you're building that business, it really comes back to understanding the importance of opportunity cost as a business. And then finally, I'll just kind of wrap up with what I think all of this means, hit back on some key points that we talked through and summarize. Okay, so my framework really is thinking about these four different areas. So first of all, build cost. Second, maintenance cost. Third, customizability. And fourth, reliability. So I think like the four of these things in most building versus buying decisions were really kind of adequate to help you think through what the right decision to make is. So thinking about build costs, there's a lot of questions there that you can ask yourself. I think the most important one is really what opportunity cost you're losing out on. That is, what could you be building instead of building this thing that you're going to build rather than buy? I think that's kind of the most important thing to consider, and we'll come back to that in more detail. The second thing is maintenance cost, right? Like after you've actually built this feature or product or kind of whatever it is that you're going to build yourself rather than buy from the market, how much investment are you going to have to continue to make to keep that alive in perpetuity, right? It's very easy to think about the upfront cost to build something and not consider the maintenance cost of something longer term down the road. But anybody who builds software, who's been building software for a while, will certainly appreciate that software doesn't just like continue to work forever, right? You have to update dependencies, you find bugs, things break, systems change. So there's always going to be some maintenance costs, and it's very important to be thinking about what that is. The third area is customizability, and I think really the most important question to ask here is how close is this feature or product to the core value of your business or product? So by that I mean, like the magic at the center of your business, the thing that you're really doing, that you're good at, that you're trying to be good at, trying to be innovative in and creative within. How close is this thing that you're considering building versus buying to that core tenant? If it's really close, it might very well make sense to build it yourself. If it's not very close, for example, email is a great example. Everybody does email. Most businesses aren't trying to deliver innovation around email. And so most of the time it makes sense to buy some service like SendGrid or Amazon SES, et cetera. There's tons of ESPs these days. And then finally, the fourth category that I try to think about is reliability. How important is the uptime and the kind of consistency of the experience of this product that you're considering buying? When you're building something yourself, one of the big upsides is that you control your own destiny, right? If you really need something to be extremely reliable and your customers aren't happy with it, and you own the thing, you've built the thing, you can always invest more heavily in it. Try and make the updates that you need to do to make sure that you get the uptime you need or the quality that you need. If it's something that you've purchased yourself and it's not or purchased from someone else and it's not a very mature product, you may be hamstrung. You may not be able to meet the needs of your customers and not be able to change anything because you're ultimately dependent upon someone else's tech stack. So reliability is also extremely important to consider. So looking a little deeper into each of those, I kind of bucket them like the two on the right are very similar and the two on the left are very similar. So looking at the two on the right, customizability and reliability, I really think of these as, to use like a steal a metaphor from astronomy, which I'm a big fan of, the habitable zone. So the habitable zone is a concept in astronomy where, you know, if a planet is too close to a sun, it is too hot to really feasibly support life of any kind, and if it's too far away from a sun, or sorry, from a star, it's too cold to support any life feasibly. There's this band of space somewhere right in the middle, which is where Earth resides, of course, that's just right, kind of in the habitable zone or the Goldilocks zone, that is neither too hot nor too cold. You know, water is liquid, organisms can proliferate, things you know, are kind of conducive for the existence of life. And I think customizability and reliability are very similar to this concept of a habitable zone, right? Like really what you're doing is kind of checking boxes, making sure that the product you're considering buying meets the criteria that you really care about to be habitable, to actually like be a good solution for what you're building for your customers. So I think, you know, that's kind of like my mental model for how I frame that. So that's perhaps helpful to think about. As you're actually doing the work of considering customizability and reliability, here's a few things to consider. First and probably foremost piece of advice I would give is make sure you write everything down, right? There's usually lots of boxes to check, lots of different things to consider, and it's probably going to happen across many days, if not weeks or even months, this whole consideration process. So make sure you're writing everything down. You're always going to have to bring people along on the decision with you, right? Like from be it stakeholders or executives at your company or even just the engineering team you're working with. Everybody needs to be bought into the decision that you ultimately make to either buy or build. And so if you're writing everything down, it's a lot easier to bring people along in that decision-making process and help them understand why you're doing what you're doing. A few other things to consider here, but you know, the other big one I'll mention is partnering with engineering. Anytime you're considering one of these build versus buy decisions, the estimate of the work to build the product or the feature product, whatever, internally is ultimately going to be something that engineering is going to inform. And so you really need to make sure that you have a really strong partnership with engineering, that you are, you know, kind of getting the help that you need to estimate the work that you need to do, and also very critically that you have like a strong enough relationship and rapport with the people you're working with that you can kind of question assumptions and push back on things. Sometimes estimates may not be right, and I mean estimates are always wrong. That's why they're estimates. But you know, sometimes there may be something that you're thinking about in terms of what you'll actually have to build that your engineering team might not be thinking about, and so estimates might not line up with your expectations. And thus, being able to have that open dialogue to talk through those nuances and make sure you get to as realistic estimates as you can create is extremely important in making any of these decisions. Yeah, great. Customizability and reliability. So skipping back to those two categories on the left, so back to this slide, build cost and maintenance cost. I think of these two a bit differently than this like habitable zone analogy, but I'll continue to stick with the on brand of astronomy. There's this concept in astronomy called the Drake equation. And what the Drake equation is trying to calculate the number of civilizations that might be out there in the cosmos, you know, other intelligent life that we could talk to, right? This is a very interesting topic in astronomy. And so the way that scientists have come up with trying to come to this number is a simple equation that's really just like a bunch of numbers multiplied together. You know, things like, you know, how many stars are in the Milky Way galaxy if we're constraining it to the Milky Way galaxy? What fraction of those stars even have habitable planets, like terrestrial planets, and then that are in that habitable zone? And then, you know, what is the rate at which those habitable planets actually begin to form life? So on and so forth, right? There's all these variables that you kind of multiply together to come up with an estimate of how many civilizations might be out there in the universe. I think of this model as like kind of the same way that you should think about build and maintenance cost, right? There's some relatively simple equations. All of the inputs to that equation are ranges, right? You don't know the numbers definitively, right? How much time will it take your engineering team to build this solution? You don't know. There's no way to know, but you can come up with a reasonable range of estimates based on estimates, right? Like, it's between a month and 2 months, right? Like those kinds of estimates are very realistic to come to. And if you create something like that and kind of plug it into one of these equations, you can come to a very realistic upper and lower bound that you can feel fairly confident in. So things to think about as you're actually doing this build and maintenance cost stuff. Again, show your work, write everything down. There's a lot of kind of moving parts, a lot of numbers, a lot of estimates. It's very easy for all this stuff to become very ephemeral if it's just conversational, and then you can't bring anybody else along on the journey. And you may not even be able to bring yourself along on the journey if you have to switch tasks, if there's a lot of time in between gathering some of this information and making some decisions. One thing I just wanted to point out in here is that, like we can make assumptions, this varies by company, but generally speaking, average engineer salary is usually about 100K, kind of up or down based on individual engineers, and benefits usually are somewhere around the tune of 20% of that. So if you kind of, work that out to monthly, you usually end up with about 10K per month per engineer. That might be different for your company or whatever, but like you can probably still distill some amount of like general for engineering effort. It's about this much per month per person. There's a bunch of other suggestions here. Gain confidence in your estimates, question estimates that sound off, like I mentioned earlier. Make sure you have this opportunity for a dialogue so that you can really kind of push back and refine any sort of assumptions that you're making by, kind of openly and, kind of empathetically questioning people's work. It's not like you're not calling into question anybody's performance, but just assumptions can be wrong and we need to question them in order to get to better and better answers. And that's really important in these build versus buy decisions because, if you're off by a factor of 10, 15%, that could be very material to influence the decision that you're making. So, just kind of like thinking through an example, I guess first, like looking at the left-hand side of this slide, this is, there's obviously no numbers on this graph, but you get the concept pretty easily, right? Like if you're going to buy a solution, some sort of SaaS subscription, you're probably looking at a very flat cost, right? You have some monthly subscription. Sure, it may go up as your product grows, but generally speaking, it's just like very flat and very simple to calculate. Internally, what you tend to see is that you start out with a pretty high cost and that cost usually goes up. There's usually more cost than you expected. You may not appreciate some of the hosting costs perhaps, or maybe you realize partway through that you need some special expertise in some technology that you didn't appreciate at the beginning, and you have to pull some time from somebody else in some other department to come work on this with you. And, so costs tend to go up and even if they start high. But at some point, if you've built the solution yourself, you should see that cost go back down. You should go from, some sort of swarm of lots of people building a solution to a point where you've gotten it built and now you can, reduce your investment and go to more of a maintenance state. And you may even see that cost go down below the buy cost, the subscription cost of whatever it is that you would have bought instead. But it's, even if you get lower, you've still got a lot of gap of that upfront investment that you have to make up for. So, that's just like an important thing to keep in mind as you're considering this. And again, going back to my like Drake equation concept, simplified initial build estimate, right? That's going to look something like how much your developer costs per month times the team size, how many people are going to work on this, times the amount of time that it's going to take you to build it. So, let's say it's 4 people for 3 months or something like that. And then you've also probably got some hosting costs across some time. Usually that's pretty negligible, but worth thinking about depending upon the solution. And by contrast, you also have this simplified initial build estimate equation, right? So fairly similar. You're still going to have some developer costs times team size and a time to integrate as opposed to build, because there's almost no solution they're going to just buy out of the box and magically it's going to work, right? You're still going to have to invest some developer time to integrate it into your product, to your backend, to whatever the case might be. There's almost always still some developer time for some sort of integration. And then, in this case, more importantly, you're also going to be adding in the subscription cost times some amount of time. And, for this example here, I'm trying to constrain it to just the build cost, right? There's also the maintenance cost. You should go through the same exercise to think through the maintenance cost, maybe even combine them into like one equation across the course of a year or 2 years or whatever you want to do. But, just for simplicity's sake, I'm trying to just think about builds here. So we did an exercise like this recently for a blog post. There's a link to that our team worked on. But like we essentially thought through how much it would realistically take to build a chat product yourself. You're going to need probably at least a team of 4 developers, and it's probably going to take you at least a quarter. At $10K a month per engineer, let's just assume, maybe different. On the flip side of this example for chat, your hosting costs are going to be extremely negligible, right? You're going to spend maybe $100 on AWS for like 3 months. By contrast, if you're buying Stream as a product, you're still going to spend some time on engineers, probably 10K. So still 10K, probably just a team of 2 instead of 4, much smaller, and it'll probably only take you a month instead of 3. So if you work all that out, right, you're looking at probably a 6x cost upfront to build a chat solution yourself versus a buy solution. Now, granted, this is all very napkin math. That details may vary. The depth at which you want to create a chat product, how many features you want to support, all that sort of stuff is totally situational. But there's still like a marked difference between those 2 approaches for Stream Chat. Looking back at like some of my past experience for SendGrid email, it's a similar story, right? Much lower numbers in general for email, but your build costs are going to end up looking at it like about 4 times what your buy cost would be, which is probably why it is so common these days for people to buy email services rather than to try and maintain mail transfer agents and handle exponential back off and all these things that an email server would have to do to actually be functional. Just buy that instead. So with that, I'd like to kind of like move into this like second act that I mentioned, and talk about opportunity cost more. So I'm sure everybody has seen some version of a kind of like quadrant graph like this, where you've got an x-axis that goes from loss to profit and a y-axis that goes from low growth to high growth, right? Pretty much any business in the world can be categorized into these 4 quadrants. Up in the top right, you have your unicorns. These are businesses that are both profitable and growing rapidly. This is extremely rare and usually happens when someone's managed to find a technology that is incredibly innovative and kind of changing the world as we know it. More commonly, you see customers in that top left quadrant that I would call successful, that are high growth, but taking losses as they manage to accomplish that growth. And then on the bottom half of the quadrant, right on the right side, you've got viable businesses, right? You're profitable and thus can sustain as a business, but you're not growing very quickly. So, you're not going to have venture capitalists lining up around the door to give you money, or, if you're a public company, your stock price is not going to be up and to the right. And then finally, the bottom left corner, you've got just failing businesses. They're growing slowly and they have financial loss to boot, and so they're just eventually going to die unless something changes. I think I bring up this perhaps trite graph to illustrate the importance of opportunity cost, right? If you're in that top left quadrant, you're still a very successful business. You can be losing money and growing rapidly and still be doing extremely well, right? There's always time to reduce your costs and leverage your customer base to make your business more profitable. Whereas if you're in that bottom right quadrant and you have very low growth, but you are profitable, like you're not going to die as a business, but you are kind of somewhat limited in your options because you're just never going to get to a place where you can leverage a very large user base, to do new and exciting things. So I think that my takeaways from like thinking about that concept of how we kind of categorize businesses in that way is that we should spend time finding and doing the things that really resonate with our users, right? Creating that high growth, focusing on the thing that is magic to our business, our product, the thing that is unique and novel. what we shouldn't be spending our time doing is reinventing wheels, right? Like it's a fairly foregone conclusion at this point in technological evolution that you shouldn't build your own mail server. You should just buy, a SendGrid or an SES or a MailJet or a MailChimp or any number of the email service providers that are out there to do that for you, because why waste your time focusing on something that's already so well built? Another great way to kind of explain this is, I think this is a quote from Marty Kaan. I believe it was in his book, Inspired. If you're just using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value. And what he's really saying there is that if there's already a good solution in the market for some piece of technology that you can go buy as opposed to build yourself, you are by definition, certainly Marty's definition, but by definition, only getting the half of the value of your engineering team. Because you're not, at that point, you're not using any creativity. You're not considering what the possibilities of what could be done with software. Instead, you're just saying, well, I want to take that thing that someone else has built and I want to rebuild it the same thing, right? If you're making 10% changes or something to a product that's already in the market, again, you're getting a lot less value out of your engineers than you could be, because you're not imploring their creativity. You're not focusing on the uniqueness of your business. And at the end of the day, you're just failing to capitalize on imagination, innovation, and all of that is really, not the way to succeed as a business, in my opinion. All right, finally, I'll just kind of wrap up here and summarize what we talked about. So thanks for listening, of course. I think the three things that I would hope that you would take away from this presentation is that, one, humans are very expensive compared to SaaS subscriptions. Engineers cost $10,000 a month. I can't think of too many software subscriptions out there that get anywhere near that monthly cost, and you usually can't do a whole heck of a lot with just one person. You usually need a team of engineers to build most anything. Second point that I'd like to emphasize is just that your company's most valuable resource is always opportunity cost. Like I was just saying, the thing that is really going to drive success for a business is finding the thing that makes your business unique, finding the problem that you're solving that no one else has solved well, and making sure that you come up with the most innovative, creative solution that you can that really checks all the boxes of what users need it to do. Most often, when you're doing a build versus buy evaluation, the thing you're considering building yourself is not going to fall into that bucket, right? It's not going to be innovative. It's not going to solve a problem that no one else has solved before. And so, really focus on the opportunity cost, the things you could be building, the creativity and imagination you could be unlocking if you weren't building something that someone else has already built for you. And finally, it's basically the same thing, but really, I think I want to impress upon everyone, every product manager out there, how important it is to focus on your core competencies, hard word to say, core competencies that are at the center of your company, right? Like the things that you are uniquely positioned to do is what you should be doing. The things that anybody else could do and thus you could buy are usually not what you should be doing. So with that, thanks for your time. If you'd like to find out more about Stream, there's a link down at the bottom of that presentation, and you can find us on Twitter at getstream_io. And if you'd like to reach out to me, feel free. I am ben@getstream.io, or on Twitter, ben_a_golden. Thanks.